thank you everyone for inviting me to speak at today's meeting of the Committee for Public Education. As Patrick said, my name is Evan Blake. I'm a member of the Socialist Equality Party and a writer for the World Socialist Web Site. And I used to teach special education in California. Now I live in Michigan and write for the WSWS. But I wanted to start by, I'll get to the issues of the inquest, and I'll speak on the situation with the pandemic here in the US, but I wanted to just begin by reviewing the present state of the pandemic and the spread of the Omicron variant. On the screen here, we see the two most recent variants that have swept the globe. There's Omicron on the right and Delta on the left. We see in red the high degree of mutations present on the Omicron variant. And I think just over the past 2 weeks, it's become very clear that we've entered a new and far more dangerous stage in the pandemic. Omicron has now been sequenced at least 63 countries throughout the world on every habitable continent, and it's spreading exponentially in South Africa, the UK, and Denmark, which conduct more DNA sequencing than other countries. And it's forecast to become the dominant variant globally in the coming weeks. And this is all taking place under conditions in which the sixth global surge of the pandemic had already been underway since last month. And the bulk of infections continue to be due to the Delta variant, which has really wreaked havoc, particularly throughout the Northern Hemisphere during this time. And it's just, I'll get into it further, but I think the situation right now, I think, is really incredibly dire, and really, I think global society is really in for a tremendous shock in the coming weeks and months. There have been statements made that in the UK by Christmas there could be as many as 1 million new infections per day, and like I said, the sequencing is not taking place in many countries, so we don't know the exact level of community transmission or how prevalent Omicron is, but it is, it's quickly taking hold and is really threatening to overwhelm healthcare systems internationally. So this slide shows the number of daily new confirmed cases per million people, and we see the previous waves of the pandemic that they've gone through in South Africa, and really the really incredible spread that's taking place right now. And I think what's happened in South Africa really portends what will happen internationally, in particular in the underdeveloped countries. The level of daily new cases has risen from an average of 420 3 weeks ago to now, or as of yesterday, it was 22,388 daily new cases, and the test positivity rates have been highly elevated. They don't have enough tests to get an adequate sense of really how many people are infected. So there's thousands that are going undetected every day. This slide shows the growth in hospitalizations. It's only for it's showing the first 2 weeks of the third and fourth wave. And I think this really underscores sort of one of the most sort of horrific indices of the Omicron variant, which is that it's having a disproportionate impact on children. And we've seen that children under 5 are experiencing the second highest rate of hospitalization in South Africa, and infants under 2 years old account for roughly 10% of all hospitalizations there, at least for the last week, during the major uptick of the surge. On Monday, South Africa's health minister stated that there has been a sharp increase in the number of babies, toddlers, and pregnant women in hospital who require oxygen. And I think, if these if these figures continue to hold, and in South Africa and globally, I think that that shift, or the growing impact on children, will produce a really produce a major shift in social consciousness, and really propel more and more workers into struggle. And I think the working class is not going to accept mass levels of hospitalization and death of their children, which we have seen that to a great extent during the pandemic. But I think the dangers that are posed are quite stark. And there was a tweet earlier today which showed that COVID-19 has actually become the number one cause of death among children, excluding accidents and other non disease related deaths. So I think the impact on children has just been really terrible, and threatens to to vastly or to become far more severe in the coming weeks and months. And I think in response to this really dire situation, just the role that the corporate media and official scientists have played has just been absolutely criminal. Here we see Doctors Anthony Fauci and Rochelle Walensky, who are the top official scientists here in the US. And over the past 2 weeks, as Omicron has been spreading, they've essentially done everything possible to disarm the population and prematurely declare that the Omicron variant is likely to be mild and less dangerous than previous variants of the virus. They haven't gone as far as officials in Australia and other countries to declare that it would be beneficial for Omicron to rip through society, sort of a variant of herd immunity. But the policies, the statements that they've made about this have had a real impact, and I think the policies that they're implementing will have the same result. It's sort of a de facto herd immunity, continuation of the vaccine only approach. And I think the virulence and lethality of Omicron, or of any variant, are sort of lagging indicators, and it'll take time to determine that scientifically. But the surge in hospitalizations and the warnings that we've seen from scientists on the ground in South Africa show that it's likely to be, the severity is likely to be similar to that of previous variants. And as this slide shows, really the higher transmissibility of Omicron really is sort of the most significant factor. This is a tweet from today by Dr. Malgorzata Gasparovich, who's a developmental biologist from Canada. And hopefully everyone on the meeting has seen the webinars that we've held, but on August 22nd and October 24th, the WSWS hosted webinars outlining the science of how to eliminate COVID-19 and ultimately eradicate it worldwide. And Dr. Gasparovich took part in both of those. And this graph, she sort of shows the impact of transmissibility, and she tweeted along with it, quote, "A virus that spreads more rapidly, even if milder, could cause much more deaths. A hypothetical example of a 10 times less deadly variant with an infection fatality rate of 0.008%, with twice or 2 times higher effective transmissibility." So that's the green line. In roughly 20 days, that variant will surpass the number of deaths from a variant that spreads more slowly, but causes more severe infection. So I can go into that a bit more later, but I think, or if anyone has questions about it, but I think it's very significant, and it's what we're seeing in South Africa, just this surge in hospitalizations. We haven't seen the indicator of deaths or the number of deaths will be a lagging statistic, but it's just given the incredible volume of infections and hospitalizations, that alone will cause a greater surge in death than if it were less transmissible and more severe variant. And I think the data that was released this week is very significant. There were multiple studies indicating that, or showing that Omicron will cause a dramatic reduction in the ability of the Pfizer, of the different vaccines to prevent infection. And essentially, the studies show that for people that have received a third dose of vaccine, what they call a booster, they have roughly the same level of protection against Omicron as someone who is double vaccinated, previously had against the wild type of the virus. And so it's essentially a qualitative shift in the efficacy of the vaccines. And if you are only double vaccinated, if you've had 2 doses, then your level of protection against Omicron is near zero. And I think it's very significant. And again, this has also been distorted and downplayed in the media, at least here in the US. They've attempted to solely present basically frame it as reason to go get your booster, and sort of the boosters are highly effective and will protect you, while essentially not stressing the real dangers posed to to everyone, but in particular to people that have had 2 doses. Here in the US, I think it's a little over 15% of all people have received a booster, but globally the figure is only just past 4%, and only 45% of the world population has had 2 doses of vaccine. So I think just the way in which Omicron can now really spread through society is essentially placed us back at square one, and it's really an incredibly precarious situation. I said earlier, they're forecasting as many as 1 million new infections per day in the United Kingdom by Christmas, and it's clear that Omicron will vastly intensify an already catastrophic situation. Here in the United States, the Delta surge is becoming increasingly dire before Omicron has taken hold. I believe today they reported that Omicron's been detected in 25 states, but the just Delta is really wreaking havoc. There's now just under 120,000 daily new cases. Over 60,000 people are hospitalized, and over 15,000 are in intensive care units, and an average of just over 1,200 people are now dying in the US from COVID every day. And this is expected to rise dramatically in the coming weeks. This is a photo of an ICU nurse here in Detroit, Michigan, which is now the epicenter of the pandemic in the United States. Michigan more broadly, but Detroit is having a major, it's part of this surge. But essentially, since the end of July, Delta has been, really spreading unchecked and ripping through American society, and it's bound up with this vaccine-only approach, and really the efforts to normalize the pandemic, normalize mass death. The speech by Rochelle Walensky on May 13, encouraging people to take off their masks. There's never been any concerted effort to educate the population on any aspect of the pandemic. They've just said, get your vaccine and you'll be okay. And that's essentially what's continued today. And that's one of the major reasons we're in such a catastrophe. But just to go into some of the statistics, Michigan now has its highest 7-day average of daily new cases since the start of the pandemic. Roughly 8,000 hospitals are at capacity, and there's the federal government has had to send in teams of doctors, nurses, and other healthcare workers to support hospitals. Only 55% of Michigan residents are fully vaccinated, and a small fraction of that has received their booster shot. Meaning that millions of people are at risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and death. and the number of patients in hospitals here is now above 4,600, which has broken the previous record set a year ago before the vaccines were available. And at this point, the entire Northeast region in the US, including Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, is experiencing an exponential growth of new cases. And in each of those states, as well as others throughout the country, they've been forced to call in the National Guard to provide treatment at hospitals. Just because of the severe staffing shortage, there's been huge levels of early resignations by nurses, elevated rates of PTSD, trauma, and it's really horrible. And and so this is all of this is taking place before Omicron has become dominant in the U.S., which is expected to really take place over the coming weeks. And I think just the response, as you've seen in Australia, the response here in the U.S. by the entire political establishment, by the corporate media and the unions, has just been just complete negligence and indifference to this deepening catastrophe. And they've, their only policy is to promote vaccines and to insist that all schools and workplaces stay open. And in particular, to prevent any disruption of the markets, and in particular the Christmas holiday shopping season, which is a major source of revenue for all the major corporations in the U.S. And the situation in schools has actually become particularly dire. That's also the sort of the central policy. When Biden spoke last week, he sorry, I'll get to that in a little bit. Actually, I don't want to jump ahead, but basically this entire fall semester has just seen a sustained mass infection of children, and wherever outbreaks are tracked, schools are almost always the #1 source of outbreaks. Here in Michigan, they keep fairly close track of that, and basically, since the surge of the Alpha variant last spring, schools have been the #1 source of outbreaks, and usually the absolute majority of outbreaks across the state take place in K through 12 schools. And there's an organization called the American Academy of Pediatrics, which compiles the number of infections among children, as well as hospitalizations and deaths. And for 17 straight weeks, there have been over 100,000 official infections among children. And the real numbers are much higher. The CDC itself estimates that roughly a third of all children under 18, or 26 million children, have likely been infected with COVID in the US. And they also have documented that nearly 1,000 children under 18 have died from COVID in the US. And I just wanted to stress this is an important picture. There is enormous opposition within the working class, among the youth, to these policies of mass death, and it's really, I think we're reaching a tipping point. And this is a photo which shows students at Martin Luther King High School in Detroit who organized a sick out, leading their teachers in it was brief. It was only 20 minutes, but it was on November 17th, the week before Thanksgiving, and they essentially, this action forced the district here in Detroit to close schools for the entire week, and they had been intending to keep them open until Thanksgiving, but knowing that there was this growing opposition, a sentiment for struggle by young people, by educators, they were forced to do that, and they've been forced to have no classes on Fridays, and and it's essentially to sort of promote hygiene theater, to say that they're doing deep cleaning on in the classrooms, which, as we all know, does nothing because COVID is airborne. But they're under enormous pressure to to sort of carry out these measures, because this, if there were to be, mass walkouts in Detroit, that would quickly spread to Chicago, to every major city. There is also there's actually really horrible. The entire situation is just really catastrophic in Michigan right now. There was the school shooting at Oxford High School last week, which is at a really really unsettled the entire population, the entire community there, but throughout Michigan and in other parts of the country. And there's been hundreds of schools and districts that have had to close ever since that shooting because of copycat threats. And there's a significant wildcat action that was taken by teachers at a school, the school at Marygrove. And I believe 4 out of 5 days this week, they organized sick outs independently of the Detroit Federation of Teachers, which is, totally corrupt and, allied with the Democratic Party. And they have, refused to go into their classrooms. Their classrooms don't have locks on their doors. They have bars on their windows. So if there were to be a school shooter, they would be, totally at risk. And, this combined with, mass infections from COVID, it's just the situation is sort of, becoming completely untenable in schools and workplaces in Michigan and across the US. And in response, to this opposition, Biden unveiled this test to stay program designed to keep kids at school, which is the same as you have that they're promoting in Australia, where if a kid tests negative, then they can stay learning in person if one of their peers tested positive. So it's just, totally unscientific measure to keep the schools open. And this policy was immediately endorsed by Randy Weingarten, shown here, who's the president of the second largest teachers union, the American Federation of Teachers. And their position, I think it's important to stress that the position of the unions and the Democrats, increasingly resembles that of the herd immunity advocates of the far right. In September, Weingarten chaired a meeting at which he invited one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration to speak, and we wrote on it today on the WSWS. But there was sort of an attempt to recover her image, where she was going to hold a meeting with scientists that have promoted mitigations in schools, but she, because of the relations that she's formed with these far right forces, far right parents groups, and herd immunity advocates, she came under pressure from them and immediately adapted to it, and the event had to be canceled. And so I think it's really a sort of explosive situation here right now, just given the sort of tremendous level of opposition that's developing with every official institution implicated in the crimes of the pandemic. And I think, the pandemic has had really a profound impact on American and world society. And it's really, it's scarred an entire generation of young people. There was a study here published Tuesday, which found that rates of depression and anxiety have doubled among children under 18 years old, with 1 in 4 young people now experiencing depression and 1 in 5 experiencing anxiety. And, the report noted that, many of these young people have themselves caught COVID, maybe suffering from long COVID symptoms, or they've lost a loved one to the disease. And there was a separate study that was done in June 2021, this summer, which found that 140,000 children in the US had lost a parent or grandparent caregiver to COVID-19. And I think just the policies that have been pursued throughout the pandemic really amount to a series of monumental crimes. And in the US, there's just been really a direct continuity between the pandemic policies of Trump and Biden, with Biden advancing nothing but vaccinations, despite this, proving totally bankrupt. So I know I'm getting to it kind of late, but I think, one of really the central purpose of the Inquest, the Global Workers Inquest into the COVID-19 pandemic, is to really comprehensively expose all of the crimes that have been committed throughout the pandemic. And I think it'll be a very significant undertaking throughout the world. And I just hopefully people have seen it on the call, but I think we've gotten off to a strong start with the inquest. We had an interview with the engineer and mask expert Nicholas Smith, who gave wide-ranging testimony on all things related to masks, masking policies in the United States. He made clear that the types of masks that have been promoted by the politicians are not safe and cannot, prevent airborne transmission of COVID-19. And he also reviewed the warnings that were made before the pandemic on the need to stockpile high-quality masks, all of which were ignored. And then I think the really most powerful part of his presentation is the month-by-month review of the major policy decisions surrounding masks, which have been made since January 2020 to the present. And I think it would be important to prepare a similar report for Australia, for every country really. There's been no effort to educate the public on these issues. I know in one of Smith's tweets, someone from New Zealand commented that it was the same thing there, that there's no effort to educate people on airborne transmission or stress the need for using the highest quality masks. And I think also, just similar, the major or one of the major aspects of the inquest will be to prepare reports, testimony on every major aspect of the pandemic in each country, including the topics of what was known before the pandemic, what was done in the critical first 3 months from January to March 2020, the issue of the Wuhan lab conspiracy theory, the impact of COVID-19 on children and the role that schools play in viral transmission, as well as the role played by capitalist politicians, the unions, and the corporate media in facilitating the policies that have been pursued. But I think really the most critical aspect of the inquest is that it will involve workers in every industry bringing forward their experiences during the pandemic. Here in the United States, we're beginning to prepare interviews, video interviews with healthcare workers, auto workers, educators, Amazon workers, and other sections of the working class, telling their stories, explaining how the pandemic has impacted them and who they hold responsible for these crimes. And I think that has to be really the central orientation of the inquest in Australia, and really fighting to bring forward the experiences of workers during the past 2 years and in the present. And I think really, in developing the inquest, the aim is to educate the working class and politically arm workers with an understanding of what has taken place and why, and who is responsible. And I think we have to see this not as a scholastic exercise, but really intimately connected to the present day fight for the global elimination and eradication of COVID-19, which is the only way we can stop new and more dangerous variants from evolving. So just in conclusion, I'd urge everyone here at the meeting to support the inquest, carefully read the initial statement if you haven't already, and prepare to give testimony on your experiences at schools and other workplaces across Australia. And above all, we must use the inquest to deepen the fight to eliminate COVID-19 globally in order to protect children and all of society from further needless infections and deaths. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Evan, for that wide-ranging report. We're now going to open up for questions, not just on the issue of the Global Workers Inquest, as important as that is, but on any aspect of the report that was just given, including the situation with the emergence of the Omicron variant, the spread of the Delta crisis, which is preceding that across the United States and other countries.
I have two questions for you, sort of. Like I've been reflecting on Omicron. It sounds like it's vaccine untouchable, undestroyable. So I'm thinking that our scientists and the people in the united front of medical medical nurses and scientists, medical people that are really amazing. That's like maybe one part of the United Front, but the rest of us are the other part. But consider, I'm considering getting a pneumonia shot.
If I could just respond initially.
Yes, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I would just, a pneumonia shot is not going to protect against COVID. So I would, what I would say, is just, it's, it is incredibly dangerous. As you said, it's, I wouldn't characterize it as sort of vaccine untouchable, but like I was saying in the report, it has had a qualitative impact in terms of, essentially bringing us back an entire dose. And so I think, I'm not sure exactly what the availability of boosters is in Australia, but once those are available, everyone on the call should get those. You should take measures to protect yourself at your workplace, wear the highest quality masks that you can get. The interview with Smith goes into it in more detail, but elastomeric respirators provide a high degree of protection. In particular, P100 masks. They look a bit funny, but these actually filter out something like 99.9997% of particles at 0.3 microns, and then 100% of particles at other sizes. So they do offer a high level of protection at your workplace and are actually much more comfortable than like N95 masks. But I think just on the question of vaccines, the technology is being developed. They likely won't have a Omicron specific vaccine ready until April at the earliest. I would say March or April is what they're predicting. And so what we have to fight for, between now and then, is for lockdowns. And I think that's going to become increasingly popular, throughout the world as Omicron rapidly spreads and just has devastating impacts, because they know how to develop these vaccines. They know how to protect people. And so they have to, what we have to fight for is taking the measures to stop transmission in the here and now while those vaccines are developed. And that's what we've advocated from the start of the pandemic, is that, first cases, during the initial months, cases have to be brought to zero. But once the vaccines were developed, we said, we have to impose lockdowns until everyone's vaccinated and it's, safe to, resume activities. So I guess, that would be an initial response, but it is really catastrophic, the impact that it's had on the efficacy. And I think it's a warning. If they allow the spread to continue, then they will, a variant could evolve that is, vaccine untouchable or completely evades the vaccines and basically puts us back at square one. And that hasn't quite happened yet. If you've had a booster, then you can still have a breakthrough infection. You can become hospitalized, but you do have a much higher level of protection.
Thank you, Evan. We're getting a few questions in via the chat box. Thank you for those people who've typed that in. There are three questions that are pretty closely connected, Evan, due to regarding the impact on children. Will asks, is there any more information on the numbers and impact of long COVID on US children? A huge number infected, a tragedy. We have a question from Frank. Can Evan discuss how the schools are the center of the pandemic and the impact on children and teachers in more detail? And I guess connected to those two is a question from Zach. What indications do we currently have for how deadly Omicron is in comparison to Delta?
Yeah, I think those are all very important questions. Just on the first one, I honestly, it's something that is very much covered up in the United States, but a lot of the best data comes out of the UK. They actually have more sort of resources allocated to tracking long COVID, and it's complicated. But the general from what I've seen, the sort of the most sort of likely percentage of children that suffer from long COVID is it's fairly comparable to adults. What we've reported in the past is roughly 15% of children are believed to suffer from long COVID, but I think it's something that is sort of still developing. I saw a report just the other day that they estimate that up to 50% of all people could be suffering from long COVID. So it's I think it's something that is poorly understood and not or sorry, I shouldn't say, but it's something that scientists are still studying. And we at the October 24th webinar, we had one of the reports was by Deepti Gurdasani, who writes on this. She's actually done a number of threads in the past on Twitter on the impacts of long COVID. But just on the, so I think it's something we have to study further, but it is quite devastating. There's studies indicating that, depending on the severity of your case, you can lose, multiple IQ points, sort of, it can have an impact on your cognitive abilities. And, I think the issue of brain fog is very terrifying. And we did an interview with a T-cell immunologist named Anthony Leonardi, where he went into a lot of this and sort of the potential long-term dangers of long COVID. But one of the things that he's most concerned about is studies. There's a study done in rhesus macaques, which are sort of the impacts of viruses on them can usually be comparable to what the experience would be in a human. And they found, signs of Lewy bodies, or they saw Lewy bodies formed in every macaque that was part of this survey or as part of this study of the effects of long COVID on them. So I think that was really alarming. And as far as I know, there have been some sort of it's not my area of expertise, but they do there have been studies on the sort of brain scans on people that have long COVID, and they've shown declines in, as I said, declines in IQ points, but also sort of damage to gray matter on different parts of your brain, and I think in particular the hippocampus, which is, they believe that the loss of the sense of taste and smell is connected to the loss of part of your brain tissue in those areas. So it's incredibly alarming, and I think really underscores the need, again, to really fight for elimination and eradication, because this, as all of the scientists that we've spoken with and many in Australia, have emphasized, this isn't something that we can just live with, long term. And just on the question on schools, there's been a number of studies that have shown that that schools are a major source of transmission. And let me just look. But yeah, so I don't know. We've written actually a number of Benjamin Mateus has written a number of articles on that on the WSWS that I could send links to. But early on, last summer, in the summer of 2020, there were studies that found that the number one non-pharmaceutical intervention that prevented tens of thousands of deaths in the U.S. and globally was the closure of schools. That when combined with other NPIs, that would sort of have the most significant impact on reducing deaths, reducing infections. And I think it's very every teacher knows that schools are centers for viral transmission, that ventilation is often very poor, filtration in rooms, and one of the interesting things that I think a lot more people have become aware of during the pandemic is the issue of CO2 buildup in classrooms, and many people use a CO2 monitor. You can use a CO2 monitor as a proxy for sort of how much how many COVID aerosols would be present, because as CO2 builds up, it means that there's not enough ventilation, you're not getting fresh air, And so, the same would be the same for COVID. And there's been many studies conducted on the lowered cognitive performance with high concentrations of CO2. So anyways, there's it's sort of intuitive that schools would be centers for transmission. There have been studies that show that. There was another one in Montreal, which showed that infections among children preceded from schools preceded surges among their parents, in their middle ages. There's one other question. What indications do we have for how deadly Omicron is in comparison to Delta? I would just say it's a lagging indicator, so we don't really know yet. We won't know that for really at least 3 to 4 more weeks, likely longer. What I've read recently is, it usually takes 5 weeks for 5 weeks on average for someone to die from COVID once they've from their infection to death. That's sort of the average amount of time. So I think in the next few weeks we'll have an accurate picture of that, and more data on it. So we can't really compare it at this point. So I guess that would be my answer there. But then it's that the fact that there haven't been deaths, and that there have been some initial reports that a lower percentage of patients hospitalized in South Africa have required ventilation or have been admitted into ICU. That means that Omicron is mild and is sort of nothing to worry about. But as I outlined in the report, the issue of higher transmissibility, if you do, sort of using the models that Dr. Gasparovich has done, and just sort of basic math, if you have higher transmissibility for a less deadly variant, than if you have a major surge in cases, then sort of numerically more people will die from that variant. So it's a lower percentage of people, but the absolute number would be higher and quicker because it would spread much more rapidly, which is what we're seeing in South Africa and in the UK and Denmark and other countries.
Thank you, Evan. I'm mindful of the time, but I'm hoping that we're going to be able to cover 3 more questions. There's one final question. Well, there's one question I'll put to you at the end about the Workers' Inquest, but there were 2 other connected questions. One from Carolyn. She raises, you talked about the action by students in Michigan. Can you talk about the role that teachers and parents are playing in opposing face-to-face learning, in particular in relation to the student sick-outs in Michigan? And Sue asks, could you please speak about the role of the educator rank and file committees, especially now in Michigan?
Yeah, definitely. Well, just on the first question from Carolyn, that action was primarily driven by the students, but there was, there was a lot of support for the teachers. It was from what we could tell, it was largely spontaneous. We didn't we don't have any members of our Michigan rank and file committee at that school, but we do have teachers in the Detroit Public Schools district. And from what we heard, there was a lot of opposition, in particular to the principal of that school, not just for COVID, but also sort of for punitive measures that he would take against students. And so opposition had been sort of brewing for a while, and it was but then it was very intimately connected to COVID, and they actually had a petition in which they explicitly referenced that and said that the schools were not safe. So it's been this whole fall semester has just been really terrible, and if you look at the number of cases in Michigan, it's just been steadily rising ever since the schools reopened it began in July when they sort of lifted all restrictions in the state. But then once the schools opened in late August, it was just a sort of a steady increase in new cases. And as I said, it's been the number one source of outbreaks, and people know that. It's sort of commonly, or it's becoming more widely understood. So yeah, so that action was primarily led by the students. It had a lot of support from the teachers at the school, and I can't answer so much the role that parents played, but I imagine the parents supported it. In general, the parents are supportive of such actions by students. And then the other question on the role of the educators rank and file committees. Well, last week, actually, we had a meeting of the Michigan rank and file committee, and it was actually the sort of the best attended meeting that we've had in at least, well, I'd say a year since the last surge that we had in November 2020. It had been, it's been a bit of a struggle to develop the committee. There's a number of members that are very very committed and very active, very active on social media. There's a few Facebook groups in Michigan for teachers, but yeah, I'd say the committee has really developed in recent weeks. We've been throughout the fall we've been publishing articles on the situation with schools and writing statements, but we really came out in support of the demonstration. I think the response from the district did have an impact. The fact that they were forced to close schools for all of the entire week of Thanksgiving. It sort of it became a bit more difficult to, everyone just wanted the week off and to be able to spend time with family. So it was there was a bit less activity on social media, but right when we got back last week. There was an uptick, but then there was the shooting at Oxford. I believe it was the Tuesday after classes resumed last week, and that, like I said, that's had a major impact. It really shocked the entire state in particular, but throughout the country. It's been national news for ever since it happened, and international news, and so it's like I was saying, it's really just a really horrific situation in the schools here right now. If you're not if you don't get infected, or if you're you're at risk of infection, at risk of death from COVID, and now the risk of death from violent school shooting or some other act of violence. So it's really, the entire society in the U.S. I think is really in a state of deep crisis, and it's sort of there's a sense that things are just crumbling. That the healthcare system is collapsing, the education system is collapsing. I didn't mention it, but in September there were 30,000 educators left the profession in 1 month alone, and that that continued in October and November. They haven't released the figures, but there's just been massive attrition in schools across the country. So it's really I think a very explosive situation, and the working class, and this is under conditions in which the billionaires in the US have amassed over $2 trillion, $2.1 trillion through August 2021, since the start of the pandemic, while millions have been thrown into poverty, or suffer from long COVID. There was an article yesterday which estimated that as many as 5 million or more workers could be suffering from long COVID right now, and that is one of the major reasons there's a labor shortage in the US. There's also the issue of inflation. In the inflation figures in November were the highest, I believe, since 1982. So 40 years, and it's been like that month after month after month. So it's sort of it's really tense, and it feels like we're at a breaking point. And I think the increase in attendance at the meeting last week was very significant. It was an important discussion. There were parents from the same county where the school shooting took place at Oxford, parents and educators from Detroit, from Ann Arbor, from other parts of the state. And there's a lot of interest in, the perspective that we outlined, of organizing independently of the unions, of the Democratic Party, and really, fighting to build a mass movement to stop the pandemic. And, it's the same sort of tense, and, there's a surge in infections in the auto plants right now as well. And we're really fighting to connect the educators with auto workers, with Amazon healthcare workers, and develop mass movement across industries, and internationally, to stop this this madness, and protect lives. So we I think it's really developing quickly right now, and there's a lot of potential, but just so I guess I would conclude with that we're making developments, and it's the same across the US. The committees on the West Coast we're seeing sort of an increase in attendance, in many parts of the country. In the South, we're having joint meetings of the Tennessee and Texas rank and file committees. People from the Alabama committee that was established last year are had sort of dropped out of touch, but now they're in contact again. And I think it's been quite powerful. And we've been reporting on developments in Australia with the CFPE, and really the need to connect the struggles in the US with those internationally. We've also participated in the meetings in Canada and in Germany. We've had participants from Brazil, Sue from your committee, and so I think it's really developing powerfully, but we have to really pick up the pace and keep pace with the pandemic, and really fight to develop these committees as widely as possible, reach new layers, fight to establish deeper connections in the working class, and really build a powerful movement to save lives.
Thanks very much, Evan. I know you need to go, but if it was possible for you to briefly just speak on one more question, which was, could you elaborate more on the form the Workers' Inquest will take?
Yeah, well, I guess I would say that is still being determined. I think we're still, there will be many more discussions about that precisely, but I think, we plan to really, compile in each country, compile, a wealth of testimony, and really document, what's taken place, as I said, with all of the major aspects of the pandemic, and really, try to present it in an accessible manner. I think one of the things we've been discussing is really developing timelines for every aspect. And I thought that was as I said, one of the powerful points of Nicholas Smith's interview was the sort of month by month breakdown. But it's a complex process, and I guess I would say that the Omicron, the emergence of Omicron has, to an extent, I don't know if disrupted is the right word, but it's sort of stalled the sort of implementation of those, sort of the presentation of the inquest. But I think so there's the interview with Smith. We're preparing more interviews with scientists, and then I think the video testimonies are going to be very central. We live in the 21st century, where there's billions of people on social media, and videos are a very accessible way to share experiences. So we're really trying to develop that aspect of it. I think that's been a powerful part of the campaign against the electoral laws in Australia, is the volume of videos that have been produced. So that's one aspect. But then I guess I would just say it's something, it's a work in progress. It is going to be a months long investigation, and it'll take really the effort of everyone that writes for the WSWS, the SEP members, and every member of the rank and file committees, to really bring forward your experiences, and to make the findings known within the working class. And I think that's sort of the most critical aspect of it, is to develop this, political and so historical understanding within far broader layers of the working class, that really the only way we can put an end to this pandemic is through through educating the working class, and that's the central social class whose interests are bound up with putting an end to the pandemic, and they're the ones, or the working class has been just sacrificed en masse throughout this pandemic, and we have to fight to really develop a powerful mass international movement to end it. And I think the way in which the pandemic is an ongoing crime, I think is important, and really if people, I think just sort of documenting, we want to bring forward sort of in minute detail sort of what's happened in each industry, and really, as I said, present a timeline and present the major turning points and the major actors. If you look at schools in the US, what's been the role played by Randy Weingarten, by Rochelle Walensky, and then Biden, Jesse Sharkey. There's a whole there's a number of really critical players who are culpable in these crimes, which have just devastated society. So I don't know. I hope that helps as an initial answer. But I guess I would just say it is going to be a very extended process, and we have to sort of think creatively about the way in which it's presented on the website, presented on social media, and really make it as widely known as possible.
Thank you so much, Evan, for your time and for your report. That was a really important contribution, very much appreciated by everyone involved. International collaboration is obviously a central aspect of the work of the Committee for Public Education, as it is for our rank and file committees around the world. And so your presentation was very much appreciated as a contribution to this meeting. So with that, we'll say thank you and let you go. Have a good evening.
All right, thank you so much for having me.